Hi there, this is George Magera once again, and of course, I'm in the supreme driver's seat, which is called my recliner. And I very seldom sleep here, but I do catch a nap every once in a while. But the main purpose of being here today is to talk about something that you may or may not know about. I know when I came here, I never heard of it, and I learned about it shortly after I arrived. And it was about the Charleston earthquake of 1886. Now, the Charleston earthquake, it started in Charleston, and it slivered its way up to Georgetown County and into Horry County. And I've heard from one or two people here in Marion County that they, in talking to their older fathers, mothers, grandfathers, whatever, that some of them felt the shocks here in Marion County. But really, the star of this whole video was Noah W. Cooper. I mean, he was old. He was there in 1886, which to me is just amazing. Noah W. Cooper was a teacher, an educator in Horry County in the Cool Springs section. And believe it or not, I mean, I don't know how old he was because I didn't know Noah, but he made this wire recording and gave a vivid description of the way the earthquake was when it happened. And I put it on the air. Well, truthfully, back then, a lot of these people knew Noah Cooper, and this recording was really a sensation. I know I played it in 1 week at least 5 times because people would tell people, and then they would call me up and they'd say, "Hey, I heard about this earthquake recording. Would you play it again?" And I played it again. I just want to alert you to the electronic trail of making the video that you're going to see, because it's something that no one that I know of has seen other than my members of the family. And I think it's quite interesting the way it evolved. You know, as I said before, they come in and asked me if I could extract a voice recording from a piece of wire. Well, this I did, and went from a piece of wire to a 12-inch record, a disc, a shellac disc at that. And we had this huge lateral recording instrument made by RCA at WJAY, and that's what I used to cut it with. Well, my copy of that stayed dormant for some time, and when reel-to-reel recording came out, we got a brush reel-to-reel tape recorder at the radio station, and I took the record and made a reel-to-reel tape of it. Anyhow, the reel-to-reel, after that, we put it on a cassette, and there it stayed, and it stayed. And that's when Nancy found it really in the console, and she said, "Well, we ought to do something with this." So it wasn't too long ago, maybe a month or two, one of my other brilliant grandsons came, and it was Sean Taylor, and I asked Sean, I said, "Sean," I said, "I have got this audio cassette, and I want to digitize it." I said, "What's the best way to do it?" So I had a boom box, and he said, "Well, Grandpa, let me hear it." And so I did. I turned it on, and he listened to it. It's a 10-minute run, but it's really interesting. And he got it, we played it for 10 minutes, and then I said, "Okay, so now what do we do?" He said, "Well, check your email." And I did, and sure enough, he had emailed the entire 10 minutes of vocal descriptions of this earthquake to my computer. So now we're digitized. And then I came up with some pictures off the internet of the devastation in Charleston, and we put it together and made the video that you're going to see. And now, for the first time in 64 years, here is our presentation of a digitized version of Noah W. Cooper's description of the Charleston earthquake of 1886.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Noah W. Cooper, a lawyer in Nashville, Tennessee, where I have practiced law for over 50 years past. But I was born in Horry County, South Carolina, near Charleston, South Carolina, where the great earthquake occurred August the 31st, 1886. At that time, I lived in Mullins, South Carolina, with my parents. I had graduated from the famous Mullins Academy, and I decided to begin life by teaching school. So I went to the neighboring county, Horry County, where my father had been a judge and a legislator, and stood the examination to get licensed to teach school. I was granted license to teach school and secured a position to teach the school spring school for 2 months at a salary of $25 per month, which at that time was regarded as a very big salary, $1.25 per day. I went down to Horry County and got board and lodging with my father's friend, Mr. Magera, who lived about 1.5 miles from the schoolhouse. Mr. Magera lived in a wooden frame house on the highway. As he was a widower. He had one little child named Isabel, 11 years old, and 3 boys, Walter, Fred, and Wiley, aged 14, 16, and 17 respectively. Well, I went down there and began teaching in school and was teaching about 4 weeks before the great earthquake happened, August the 31st, 1886. On that day, I went to school and taught school as usual, and came back to Mr. Mitchell's residence in the afternoon and sat down on the front porch and read a good deal of the afternoon. And among other things, strange to say, I read Morris' Physical Geography of the World, telling about the Earth's surface and what changes had happened in it in many years. And strange to say, I read that afternoon about the great Lisbon earthquake, which killed 70,000 people, and the great earthquake in Sicily, and the destruction of Herculaneum in Pompeii by the eruption of Vesuvius. So I lay down to sleep that night with my mind filled with these thoughts about earthquakes. The moon was shining that night, but it was cloudy, so we had some light. After we'd all been asleep for 2 or 3 hours, way toward midnight of August 31st, 1886, I was suddenly awakened by a great noise. And I jumped out of bed with my night clothes on and jumped and ran out into the piazza, and the house was shaking, creaking very greatly, and the girl and all the boys and Mr. Misher ran out also in their night clothes. We all gathered there in the piazza, and they said, "What is it, Mr. Cooper? What is it? What is it, Mr. Cooper?" And I said, "Why, it's an earthquake. It's an earthquake. The earth is being shaken. Let's get out in the yard." And we ran out in the yard in our night clothes and huddled together there in the night, in the dim moonlight where the clouds were running by. And the great tremors came, and the earth shook as if it would break in two or fall beneath our feet. It frightened us immeasurably. We were all very much frightened. We cried and prayed together, and I said, "Get out from under the oak trees," great big oak trees in the yard, and they careened back and forth as if they might fall, and any minute we expected probably the earth would open and engulf us. But luckily we were not engulfed, but we were greatly frightened. We finally got back in the house during one of the periods when there were no tremors, got our clothes and put on our clothes, and waited in the yard and hung around there while tremor after tremor came and shook the building very much and shook the trees and frightened us all very much. In the meantime, we heard great cries and prayers from all around the neighborhood. Apparently everybody was frightened. It was put a 6 or 7 neighborhood, and we heard the cries and prayers of people from far and near. Very much distressing, very distressing. I heard distinctly during the time my friend Bill Misher, who lived about a half a mile beyond us, across the creek. And Bill Misher, I knew his voice well. He was down on his knees crying and praying apparently, praying God to forgive his sins and to save him. Bill was known in that country as a kind of a rounder. He's not a very bad man, but he had some habits that were not very church-going habits, and he was regarded as sort of a sinner by the people at large. But Bill was praying, and we could hear him above all the other noises in prayer. I could hear Bill Misher praying God to forgive him and save him. So finally I said to Mr. Misher, "I better go down over there and see Bill. He'd go crazy. He'd be frightened to death nearly. And I better go down and see the pacifying. I don't believe we're going to have an earth. Don't believe the earth is going to open and engulf us." So with Mr. Misher's consent, I walked down the highway in the night, middle of the night, and crossed the creek And I remember I was going along every now and then, we'd have a tremor of the earth, and I was afraid the earth would open and swallow me, and I'd grab a little tree to hold to in case the earth did open, so I could probably save myself to holding a tree. But I finally got over there where Billy Mission was, and there he was down in the corner of the fence, praying and begging God to forgive his sins, and promising God he would do good and be good if he'd save him, and not let him die. And Bill was sweating, his clothes were wet with sweat, and his face was full of agony. And I went to him and tried to ease him, and told him, I said, Bill, you don't have to keep crying and praying. God will forgive you. He'll forgive you. He said he'll forgive you if you'll ask, and you've already asked. Stop crying and praying now. Get easy. If it comes to an end, it will be all right, but I don't believe the word coming to me. And I was saying, Bill, Miss was going along, and brought a big rocking chair out in the middle of the yard in the moonlight, and was in that rocking chair rocking, and she was shouting and praying God, and blessing God. And she was saying, oh God, I'm so glad the world's coming to an end. I've worked with the sinners of this world long enough, and I'm glad that Judgment Day is here, and I'm going home to heaven. I know I'll be there in a few minutes. And that when the Bill Mission was there, and every now and then he'd get excited again and start praying again. But she sat there in the middle of the yard, praying and crying and thanking God for his mercy, and saying she expected to go to heaven in a few minutes. That kept up for half an hour or more, but we finally got Bill Mission quiet. And he settled down, and his wife came out with him, and the baby, strange to say, kept quiet and never tried to talk. But about that time, daybreak came, and I walked on back away from Bill Mission and went back to my boarding house with Mr. Mayberry Mission. And then Mr. Mission and his children had been sitting out waiting, and while Trimmer came along taking the world. But I said to Mr. Mission, now, Mr. Mission, we'll eat a little breakfast if you say so, and I'll go to the schoolhouse, because I know all the people will be there this morning to talk to me. So Mr. Mission fried us a rasher or two of bacon, and fried an egg, and baked a cake, a whole cake, and we sat down and eat a very frugal meal. And occasionally while we were eating, we'd have a trim off the earth. And then we got up and went to the schoolhouse. And when I got to the schoolhouse that morning, I was not surprised, because I saw all the people there. Every father, mother, faculty, and other man, and the people in the country who could come were there. They had known me sometime, knew my father before me. My father had been a judge and a legislator in the county, and they thought because I was his son, I must knew him more, knew it put near all. Anyhow, I thought I knew a good deal myself. And so when I got there, they all asked me, what is it, Mr. Cooper, what's it about? What's going to happen? Is the world coming to an end? And they gathered around me, crowds of them, and I stood up on the school steps and was trying to explain to them that an earthquake, that I didn't think the earth would open and engulf them, that I didn't think we'd all be killed, that most of the earthquakes that had killed people had happened in mountainous countries and not in low, sandy countries like ours was, and I didn't think the earth would open and engulf us, and I thought it would all be over in a day or two perhaps. But while I was speaking to them, all of a sudden the worst kind of tremor came. A tremor came, it seemed to look like it would just break the earth in two. Terrible sound below, a great rumbling, and the earth rocked to and fro, and the schoolhouse shook. The mud and stick chimney was knocked down. The wig stands thrown off the tables, the hats knocked off the pegs, and people huddled together in great fright. And I remember very distinctly there was a great cotton patch out near the schoolhouse. Several acres of cotton, and the cotton bolls were just beginning to open. It was August the 31st, 1886, and the cotton bolls were just beginning to open. And that cotton patch rocked to and fro as if a great wind or hurricane was going over it. And yet there was not a breeze in the sky at all. The earth seemed to rock as if some great giant's hand were underneath, shaking it that way. And we were all frightened beyond measure. But I stayed there and talked a little bit after this great shock, and we finally agreed to adjourn school that day and go home. It was a wonderful feeling, a wonderful and a thrilling feeling, and one that made you feel like you were right on the verge of death. But they went home that day, and these tremors continued for several days. But no heavy tremor occurred after that day at the schoolhouse. I often thought that I'm probably the only man ever lecturing on earthquakes and talking about earthquakes, and had a real sample of a very violent earthquake at the time I was talking. But anyhow, I went back home, and the tremors kept up for several days. But I was constantly asked by people here and there what it meant and all that. But the next Sunday morning, the preachers all preached that God Almighty had sent the earthquake as a judgment on the people, to warn them that they better get ready to die, that they better quit all their sins and come and join the church. And the result was that thousands of people joined the church in that county and in neighboring counties. The earthquake was in the Charleston County, in Georgetown County, and Horry County particularly. And in Horry County, where I was, it was very violent. But there were hardly any brick houses in the county. The result was that no house was thrown down and nobody was killed. We heard in the next day or two after the earthquake that Charleston had been destroyed. And we learned that the railroads There was no railroad in that county at that time at all. But we learned that wigwagged out of position by the earthquake so that the trains couldn't go, and some of the wires had been thrown down and they couldn't communicate with Charleston. So we heard for several days that Charleston was destroyed. And most of us had kinfolk or relatives in Charleston or friends, and we imagined they were all destroyed. But after we got final communication with Charleston, we found nobody was destroyed in Charleston except about 12 people who were killed by falling brick walls. And that no other great injuries occurred except those. The preachers preached very strongly that God had sent the earthquake as a judgment, and most people did like Bill Mitchell. They joined the church and quit their sins, and the churches were overflowing with people, new people, white and black, who joined the church. And the result was that the country became very religious. Many of the preachers preached that the men ought to cut down their vineyards. A great many vineyards in that country, very fine vineyards. And most of them were cut down. Now, I remember my father had a very fine vineyard covering an acre or two, and he cut it all down for fear somebody would drink wine and get drunk again. And it had a great moral effect upon the people at large, and had a great deal to do with building up all the churches in that country, and it led the revival lasted for years. And it reminded us all of the statements of the poet, which said, "Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though strong and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to live that each tomorrow find us better than today."